Jeff and I used to play a gig at the Renaissance Fair, and yes, we were both wearing tights. It was not a good event, but we had fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Jeff's a fine trumpet player. You've got a big studio out there now. How many students you have?
Somewhere around 40 a week, something like that.
So he's very, very busy. And you studied with Claude for 10 years, 11 years?
Yeah, 10 years.
10
from
years
like
Claude.
84 to 94.
Okay. And so I'm going to turn this over to Jeff, who's going to run this a little bit different from the other ones, he tells me. So it's all up to him. And after about 30 minutes or so, then we're going to open it up for questions. If you would send the questions via chat, preferably to myself. I'm hosting this session, and then I will relay them to Jeff. So Jeff Purtle, take it away.
Okay. So what I did to maximize my time is I used some of my Final Cut skills and edited down a clip that'll be about 26 minutes, 30 seconds. I'm going to kick it off, and it's the most concise summary of all the Claude Gordon stuff I can come up with. And then I'll be sitting here watching and everything. So you can be typing your questions to KO and I can be reading them. And then as soon as that finishes, then we can just freely answer questions and get in even more things that might provoke your thought. So I'm going to kick that off right now. I have to mute a few things. Here we go. Welcome to my studio. My name is Jeff Purtle, and in 30 minutes, I will summarize what's unique and significant about Claude Gordon and his teaching for trumpet and brass players. This is a bit of a daunting task since I studied with Claude for 10 years in lessons since 1984. Looking in my studio here, I can say that no amount of equipment or degrees on the wall or famous people that you study from matters as much as knowing how to practice. My most valuable asset in my studio is my library of method books and solos, because the knowledge and experience that is in those books has become mine. And the person that showed me how to digest that information and make it a part of myself was Claude Gordon. Claude Gordon stayed 10 years with cornet legend Hurrell Clark. If you look in Claude's first published book, Systematic Approach, you will see 7 items of brass playing listed, and they are essentially the same as the 7 items listed in Hurrell Clark's Setting Up Drills book. Therefore, if you have a problem with what Claude Gordon taught, then you have a problem with what Hurrell Clark taught. This is where Claude's teaching became slightly controversial, because he said that there's only one way to play the brass instruments and that all other ways are incorrect. What he was referring to was regards to the mechanics of playing. As we list off these 7 items, it should become apparent that they're not that controversial. Each of the 7 items work together in harmony, and any one item can't be taken away and made to be the only thing that matters. Wind power is always the first item to address, because most problems relate to this. However, it's important to note that wind power is not the same as wind capacity, and people that get sidetracked with trying to measure how much capacity their lungs hold or various power is the energy behind the blowing. And in order to maximize this, it involves correct posture, which basically means you take a big breath and your chest and lungs expand. And as you exhale, you don't let your chest collapse downward. When your chest collapses downward, you lose your power. And if you lose your power, then you'll try to make up by doing lots of other things that create problems. So if this one thing is working correctly, it causes other things to work easier. This also takes the focus off whether your stomach moves or not. Some people, it'll become more apparent that their stomach may or may not move, but that's not the focus. If your chest is maintained up and you're taking a big breath, everything else will function the way it's intended to function. So we're talking about efficient use of wind and specifically the power behind the blowing. For those things to work well, it's as simple as taking a big breath and keeping your chest up. The tongue is the second item of the 7. The first thing to talk about, though, is what we would call tongue level. Tongue level means that as you go lower, your tongue goes flatter in an ah syllable, which thereby increases the size of the inside of your mouth and causes the air to go slower. As you ascend and go higher, your tongue goes up and forward in your mouth, which changes the shape and the size of your mouth so that the air comes out your mouth faster. Tongue level, though, is where Claude Gordon was even more unique, saying that for every single note on your brass instrument, you can feel where the notes are, not with your lips as much as you can with your tongue. And that when you're acutely in tune with where your tongue level is for each note, if your tongue is in the right place for that note, you basically can't miss it. There are some people that will say that the tongue doesn't move at all. There are some schools of thought that say you should just think ah the whole time. Most of the people that do that and that really do that, they struggle with being able to play in the high register on the trumpet. I would like to play an MRI video recently done by Sarah Willis, who's a French horn player. As she ascends to higher notes, you can see her tongue moving up and forward, and the speed of the air is being controlled by the tongue. I would argue that every single person that plays a brass instrument does this to some extent or another. Some people might do it more efficiently than others, but everyone does it. Within the second item, there's also a unique way of doing single tonguing. Claude Gordon referred to it as K-tongue modified. Some people might call it anchor tonguing or dorsal tonguing. K-tongue modified, I believe, is a better name for it. Anchor tonguing was something that Claude Gordon never liked that description of it because the tongue is not actually anchored or firm or locked in place. It is actually kind of flexible and able to move around. When you slur, notice where the very tip of your tongue is. Now, when you do the same thing, K-tongued, ki, notice where the very tip of your tongue is. Then do the same thing with single tongue and notice how it's different. K-tongue modified, though, as it would when you're K-tonguing. So at the very tip of your tongue is sitting around the top edge of your bottom teeth, and you're producing the tack just slightly back from the tip. Not in the middle of the tongue, but slightly back, going T, 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 T. It allows you to maintain the arch in the front part of your tongue and allows you to feel every note in a way that you couldn't do any other way of single tonguing. This came from Herbert Clark too, but most people miss it. If you look in Herbert Clark's characteristic studies, he describes K-tongue modified single tonguing, but he only does it in 1 or 2 sentences. But then following it, he's got some exercises that work particularly on just K-tonguing. Very few people work on just K-tonguing. When we do exercises, the exercises should transform our habits and our playing. You can understand that the value of playing an exercise day after day for a few weeks, maybe a month, until it causes things to evolve and change in your playing. New habits are developed and they start to feel different, and your playing becomes easier. Wind control is the third item, and a perfect example of how several of the items work in harmony. Wind power and the tongue work together with wind control. When we go to higher notes on the trumpet or any brass instrument, your tongue has to move into the E position more. But without the increase of wind power, the note will shut off. To illustrate this point, Claude frequently made comparisons to flying an airplane. This is a perfect example of how wind power, the tongue, and wind control all work in harmony. Any of you that have flown in an airplane can relate to feeling how the pilot gives the engines more power as the plane is angling up. So what is happening is the pilot is pulling back on the stick, which is raising the elevator in the back, which is the flat tail in the back of the plane. It's angling the plane up. And if that's all he did, air would hit the bottom of the plane. It would create more drag or more resistance. The plane would slow down and it would go into a stall. So the pilot has to coordinate the right amount of power to increase with the engine so that it can climb to a higher altitude. In a similar sort of way, that's what we do when we play certain exercises that people might call lip flexibility studies. Claude Gordon would call those exercises tongue level studies because you're feeling how your tongue moves you from note to note. But in conjunction with moving your tongue, you also have to crescendo for the upper notes and decrescendo for the lower notes. And what this does is it changes habits and allows you to feel how to use the air and play more with the air and less with your lips playing the instrument. And it's one of the things that unlocks how to play the trumpet.
Okay. Now, any one of you or all of you individually can learn to do that easily with proper practice.
The next item is the fingers of the right hand for trumpet players, or the fingers of the left hand for French horn players. Or if it's a trombone player, it would be your wrist and your grip and hand position on your right hand. With fingers, though, this is one of the items that was better explained in person with Claude. And I will just show briefly what I'm talking about. He wanted people to not just press the valves down, but strike them down hard and lift them high. And also that your thumb of your right hand would not be between the valves like this, between the first and second valve, but on the front side of the valve, right, not bent. And that would make your fingers go into a position where you're not on the tips and you're not flat, but you're on this part of the finger right here that you would call the ball of the fingers. And so when you're doing this, you're striking and lifting. So when we would do different exercises like Clark's technical studies, the primary thing the first time through the book was to nail down the fingers working like that. Not for speed, not for anything else other than the fingers working the right way. This is one of the things related to wind control also. So if your fingers are working right, where they're clean, going up and down and striking and lifting like we should, it allows you to play cleaner, and a lot of other things can work easier. The fifth item might seem insignificant, but it is the grip of the left hand. This matters more than most people think. Your left hand, you want it to be where it's firm grip, and at the same time, you want your wrist to be able to move around freely. Because when we're moving from low to high notes on the trumpet and you're thinking ah and e, your jaw will also move around at the same time. And as your jaw moves, your face moves. And if your wrist and everything is locked in one position, it can't be free to move as it needs to move. The sixth item is the muscles of the face. Now, the muscles of the face basically have to support your lips so that they keep vibrating. And over time, they get strong to where they can last a really long time. I like to compare the muscles of the face and the strength involved with that to the strength of a ballerina versus the strength of a weightlifter. The way you develop these muscles is by practicing lip flexibility studies that I think would be better called tongue level studies. By doing those, it teaches your face and the muscles of your tongue and your air and everything else how to move around, and it learns how to work more efficiently and easily, and you can play longer. The seventh item is the lips. The lips function is to just purely vibrate and produce sound in response to what is happening with the wind power and the tongue level that's making them vibrate. In a similar sort of way, if our lips respits them from that, then the lips won't be an issue. And then the tongue and the air can make everything work the right way. St. Jacome said the mouthpiece should be placed 2/3 on the top lip and 1/3 on the lower, according to all authorities except one person I shall not name. He, of course, was talking about Arbin. Most people look at the Arbin book and say Arbin said to play 1/3 on the top lip, but you have to note that Arbin was not dogmatic about it. And then also in the Arbin book, Arbin talks about people that have changed their embouchure and had problems. You have to ask yourself, what were they changing from and what were they changing to? If they were trying to be like Arbin, they would have been changing from being higher on their top lip to being lower. It bears mentioning that Claude Gordon did not have anyone buzz on their mouthpiece. About the only time he would ever do that is if someone was going through an embouchure change and they wanted to get used to producing a sound in a new location on the lip. He would say, put the mouthpiece in the new place and take it off, do that. And it wasn't to play any exercises, wasn't to play anything more than just getting a sound. Once that happened for a few days, never buzzed the mouthpiece again. We never played exercises on the mouthpiece. We never played anything on the lead pipe. We never played anything with the lips by themselves. His response was always that you play the trumpet and not the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece attached to a buzzing device still can't feel the same as it does attached to the trumpet. The reason why is the trumpet is a tube and it wants to resonate at certain frequencies. And when we're playing our lip flexibility studies and playing all the open notes or second valve notes, we are feeling how the tongue level and the wind power and the air and everything responds for each of those notes. And we can feel how the notes slot in, and we're learning how to control our particular trumpet. That's the reason why practicing flexibility studies matters so much, so that you can feel how to efficiently find those notes and slur over the instrument. Focus on feel is an important thing. There are some that say, don't think about the feel. Like those that might be from other schools of thought would say, just focus on the music, just focus on the sound. What's different about Claude Gordon is that when we focus on the sound, we might miss the feel, and then the sound might not be there very much longer. But if we focus on the feel, we can play easier, and then the sound will also be a byproduct of that. So good sound is the byproduct of correct, easy playing.
Hi, my name's Dave Bertie. I've been working with Jeff Purtle now for 4 years. He's unlike any trumpet teacher I've had before. I've had some really good players who taught me. But Jeff is probably the first guy I've met who I would say is a very, very good teacher. I recently completed top tones with him, and the material that he brought into my practice routines months before the difficulties I was going to face in the top tones reared their ugly head surprised me a lot. And that is really what the Claude Gordon approach is about, preparing a student for the difficulties they're about to face. On a personal note, I think that it is so much nicer to come to the practice room looking forward to practice, because you're going to develop your skills. You're not simply going to restrict yourself to what the pad requires. So that kind of yourself, not for other people, that is very cool.
A typical practice routine would have breathing exercises. The purpose of that is to develop wind power. The next item is tongue level exercises, or what some people call lip flexibility. I wish everyone could experience how great a book Daily Trumpet Routines by Claude Gordon is. Some other great books that fall into the same category are Charles Cullen Advanced Lip Flexibilities, Charles Cullen 100 Original Warm-Ups, Dale Steger's Lip Flexibilities, Walter Smith Lip Flexibilities, Earl Iron's 27 Groups of Exercises on page 19 and happen later through the first part of the book, page 157 out of St. Jacome, page 125 out of Arbon. That has to be the first thing in your practice routine. No buzzing. You do this because you're trying to feel how your tongue level and your wind power work together. And feeling how the notes slot in on each note is training you how you and the trumpet are interfacing together and how you can play the most efficient. The next thing that you follow it with usually could be something with tonguing exercises, which could be double or triple tonguing sections out of Arbon, or at the last number 38 of setting up drills, it's a tonguing exercise. You can use that. You can use a whole host of other things. Then the next thing would be on scales in arpeggios. Another significant thing to go through is Herbert L. Clark's technical studies, which falls in the category of scales and arpeggios. To do this book the way that Clark assigned Claude Gordon means that you would go through the book multiple ways and with alternate fingerings. One first way to go through the book is 1 week of single tongue, the second week of K-tongued, the third week of doing double or triple tonguing, and then finally the fourth week doing it slurred like it's written. But however, doing a bunch of alternate fingerings to train your third finger to work independently and to give familiarity with different fingerings. That's your first time to the book, making the focus of striking your valves hard, lifting your fingers high, and not worrying about speed or how many times you do it in one breath or how soft you do it. And then after you make it through up to lesson 8 or maybe lesson 9, you go back through the book again, and you start working a little bit on more speed or playing it faster or softer or more times in one breath. Each time you do that, you just push a little bit further, but always maintaining accuracy and clarity, and that your fingers are striking and lifting high, so that you're going to make the most efficient use of your fingering so that you can play longer in one breath later. Eventually, it turns into where you're playing so soft as in a whisper that you can barely hear it coming out of your trumpet, which means that everything has to be responding with just a very slight bit of air. So that shows you that your lips have to be vibrating efficiently. If you're stiff, that won't happen. You won't be able to accomplish some of those things that are in that book. But if you do it step by step through the book, every single thing that's in that book can be accomplished and more. Like, for example, playing Clark's Etude number 5 in one breath, or playing the 3-octave chromatics at the end of the book 4 times or more in one breath. That's all possible for anyone. I've seen students do it. I've done it. I've got friends that have done way more than what's in that book. All the metronome speeds are more than possible to outdo. The thing is that it's a process, step by step. So that book should be worked on at least probably once a year. You might spend 3 months or 6 months out of the year in it, and then take a break and do some other kind of scale, etude, technical sort of finger study book to replace that with, and then periodically come back to Clark. There are a lot of great books that can kind of interface in a lot of aspects of that, like Aaron Harris Advanced Studies, where it's got scale studies and every key and an etude, or Gotti's method, which has something similar where it goes through every key. The other thing that was unique with Claude is that we played in every single key every day. So that it didn't matter if you were playing in C sharp or F sharp or B or whatever. One key is not any different than another. You got to know them all. And the more you do that every day, it becomes second nature.
Hello, my name is Paulo Silva from Brazil. I'm a trumpet professor at Minas Gerais State University. In 2016, I bought the book Hit It Hard, Wish It Well from Jeff Purtle. When reading this book, I found similarities between Claude Gordon's teaching and Clark. My first interest was about the teaching of Clark Technical Studies. That's why I got in touch with Jeff. I've been studying with him since August, step by step, the way we can improve our playing, the importance to understand why we do each exercise. Now I can say that each exercise I play or I teach, I have the reasons why I'm doing that. That's why in the book, it's important to know what, how, and why we do such things. And the one thing in particular for me was very important, the practice of habit. I think the students, most of the time, want the results immediately. It's necessary to understand the time that needs to things or to each exercise become naturally. With the help of Jeff and following the Claude Gordon's teaching, now I realize how important, what, how, and why we do each exercise, and give time to do each one. The results will come in time.
Then the next element in the practice routine is usually involves like etudes or solos or transposition or orchestral excerpts or jazz improvisation. And you notice that that comes after all the technique stuff has already been done. You've done your flexibility scales, breath control, all this stuff. Now you get to play some music. Then after you do that, you don't let yourself get tired when you're doing the practice either. So another principle is that you always take short, frequent rests to avoid even the slightest fatigue. The final thing, some books that you can use for that are Claude Gordon's Systematic Approach book. And after you complete that, you can go on to his 30 velocity studies, which has like scale patterns that go higher. But the basic idea is Claude's Systematic Approach book, lesson 2, which is just one octave arpeggios, where it slurs like a one octave down, like C, G, E, C, and you hold the last note till all the air is gone. The purpose of that long hold is not to be a long tone. Claude never did long tones. The purpose of it was actually to do an isometric squeeze so that you develop the muscles that you use to blow. When you do that and you squeeze all the air out, you go to the point where the note actually can't come out. And then you got another couple seconds that you squeeze the rest out, fighting to keep your chest up. And if you're doing it correctly, you'll feel the muscles in your back get a workout from doing this. And again, the main thing you're thinking about is keeping your chest up, not letting your chest collapse. And it isolates the muscles you use for blowing, and it really develops your power. You do that, and it chromatically works down. It works into the pedals. Pedal F through C sharp, you use normal fingerings, like F would be first valve. You don't use other fingerings like some other people might do. So E would be 1 and 2, pedal E flats 2 and 3, and so on, down to C sharp. Then once you hit pedal C down through pedal F sharp on the trumpet tends to be flat. For a lot of people, it could be as much as like a fourth below the pitch. That's nothing to worry about. You don't want to play them loud. You just want to play them with a nice, full, relaxed sound. Because what they'll do is they'll get you to get a better vibration off your lips. They'll also encourage your embouchure to be higher on your top lip. And then over the course of going through the Systematic Approach book, the exercises expand. You'll also notice this is a pattern in Claude Gordon's teaching, that the material expands range-wise and interval-wise. Like you might start with the 1 octave arpeggios, then it turns into like 2, 3, 4, 5 octave scales on arpeggios. What that does, it gets you to play over the full range of your instrument without feeling like it's hard to go to a high note or a low note, and your trumpet playing feels like it's more connected over the whole range of your trumpet. So that high notes and low notes don't seem like they're that different from each other. It's just a matter of your tongue level and air being in a different place. So you work that down as far as you can go. Now, once you get to double pedal F, it's easy to get that in tune. And then you go down chromatically. Now, in the book, it goes down to pedal C, and it says continue down as far as possible. That really means as far as pedal C, I just stopped there. At one point, I'd gone down to a quadruple pedal C. It's pretty hard to know what you're doing once you get down below a triple pedal C, because it's hard to hear the pitch on the trumpet. But the point is that you go down as low as you can. You take about a 5-minute rest. Then you start on the part 2, which is what we'd also call the up routine. And on that one, you never do a long hold on the last note. If you do that, it'll mess you up. So don't do that. It's written in the book. Notice what's written in the book. With a method book that someone like Armin or St. Chacombe or any of these other people have written, think about it, that they've put their wisdom into this with their career, and they've written a few little things in the book. So it benefits all of us to read it. Then it works up chromatically. And then the other thing that you'll see in the book is there's a rest in between each one of them. The principle behind that is you rest as much as you practice so that you don't get tired, and you go up as high as possible. What that means is, like, the book goes up to a double high C. That doesn't mean that you have to go to a double high C. If you get to a high C and it comes out and you get to high C sharp and you miss it a second time, but you hit it on the third time, then you try for the high D. You try the high D, you miss it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Once you miss it 3 times, you stop. You don't go any further. That's the whole purpose of it. You do just enough to kind of get the feel of the tongue level and the air up there, but not so much to tear yourself down. And you only do this once a day. And then after that, you do what we call relaxed lip or approach lesson 3, part 3. It's a 2-octave arpeggio. It goes C in the middle of the staff, C, G, E, C, G, E, pedal C. You do that like 3 times. I personally will put it down to, the first time I'll go to single pedal C, the second time I'll do double, and the third time I'll go to triple pedal C. And then I put my trumpet away. I don't touch my trumpet for at least an hour. Every single book in every page that he ever assigned had a couple stamps, just 3 of them. One said, big breath, chest up. That was on every page I ever played out of when I took from him. He put it on there with a little rubber stamp. The next thing is if we were doing scale studies like Arbin or Clark scales or whatever, or arpeggios or an etude, he would always stamp, the second stamp would say lift fingers high, strike valves hard, because he wanted to drill that into your head so that you didn't forget it. And when you're doing those things, you focus primarily on that. But then when you're doing lip flexibility studies, like we mentioned before, or you're doing a range study, the second stamp he put on that page was watch the tongue. And what he meant by that is, we talked about the stuff with tongue level and K-tongue modified tonguing. He wanted you to try to visualize what your tongue was doing inside your mouth. In 2016, I published an ebook on the Apple bookstore that is rather unique. It's called a multi-touch book. It's got embedded video of 110 minutes of Claude Gordon videos, some videos of myself demonstrating things, some illustrations and audio files, and things not possible in a paper book. I encourage you to check that out too. You're also welcome to contact me through my website at purtle.com, where you can email or call me on the phone. Smarter and get more out of your practice so that playing can become a joy and that you can accomplish things that you didn't dream you could do. Welcome to my studio. My name is Jeff Purtle. Okay, I know that was kind of quick. I hope,
Wow.
I hope it wasn't too fast for everyone. That's
Yeah.
not my normal talking speed.
Yeah, that was 10 years and 26 and a half minutes.
I was
Incredible.
trying to make it concise and clear. Hopefully there's some questions about all that stuff.
All right, so there's some questions. So first of all, before we get to those questions, I'm curious, how did you end up meeting and get attracted to Claude and the whole message, the whole method and philosophy and everything?
Okay, well, several things happened to me leading up to that. I had taken with a really great trumpet player that Roy Poper and I both knew, named Chuck Bertie, who's from Los Angeles. He was a great player. He was actually at University of Southern California when Tommy Stevens was there, and Chuck Bertie actually played principal trumpet in the orchestra. And Tom Stevens and other people were below him in the groups. Mr. Bertie was a great trumpet player, but he really didn't teach me how to play the trumpet. It was basically, he would play and say, just do it like this. And when I started with him when I was in 5th grade, and I grew up thinking that, well, Mr. Bertie doesn't miss notes. He doesn't play out of tune. That's just the way you're supposed to do it. But I couldn't make some things happen on my trumpet playing. And then when I was about a sophomore in high school, I got in an accident where I chipped off my front tooth. And then my playing started going a lot worse, and I started trying different horns and mouthpieces, and I didn't know what to do. And one of my friends that had told me about Claude Gordon and showed me some of the books, he was another Charles Brady student. He had gone to take lessons with Mr. Brady, and I heard his playing improve. And then he stopped, and I heard his playing go down. So I knew that something that when he was studying with Claude Gordon, I knew something was different. So I basically begged my mom to go to the first Claude Gordon brass camp in 1984, and worked out being able to eventually get lessons with Claude, because my friend had actually quit with Claude right before that. And Claude had a waiting list that sometimes would take people a couple of years to get on. And when I called him up for lessons, he said, "Okay, your time is Monday at 5:00." And I was like, I'm in Bakersfield, which is 2 hours away, and I get out of school at 3:30. And he said, "Well, that's the time. If you don't want it, I'll find someone else to fill the slot." And I was like, "I'll take it." So my mom would basically drive me down to Los Angeles, and we would get out of school early, which I kind of thought was cool because I didn't mind getting out of high school early. And I studied with him, and then I moved to Los Angeles to go to Cal State Northridge, and kept studying with Claude while I was a student at Cal State Northridge. And I went to all the Claude Gordon camps, and actually was a counselor at several of them, and did his pedagogy class, and he really showed me a lot of stuff.
All right, that's cool. So here's a specific question. Here's a guy saying that in a systematic approach, Claude talks about there's a circle with arrows and the lips, pointing towards the center. And Claude indicates that, your lips should move towards the center. And this guy says it's not comfortable for him. In your opinion, does he have to make that work and follow those instructions in order to follow the Claude Gordon method?
No, not necessarily, because that's one of the things that Claude said he wished he probably would have left out of the book, because it confused some people. Some people have thought that it means like your aperture, you're opening your lips. It doesn't. It means what he's getting at with that. If you notice, like the sentences around that, he says to not smile, because he was getting at that you don't want to smile and like stretch your lips back when you're going higher, and that it has a feeling that your lips are slightly contracting towards the mouthpiece. Like if you were to look at the original text of the Herbert Clark's technical studies, he uses the word contract, and that's kind of what he was trying to get at, is that the movement is more as like as you're sending your lips slightly feel like they're contracting towards the mouthpiece. But if you are doing some of the stuff where you're crescendoing or kicking the air as you ascend, it will tend to make that happen for most people anyway, so you don't even have to really talk about it. So probably if that person says they can't do that, they might even be trying to overdo it.
Okay. Am I muted? Okay. And another question here. Some people have trouble playing the single pedal notes, and he's wondering if you just keep working at it long enough, are they going to start to happen, or could it be a physical issue with the way their teeth and their chops are set up that prevents them from being able to do it at all?
I believe everyone could do it. I teach people at all different age levels, and one of the things that's kind of funny is most people that have the easiest time are my absolute beginners. Like kids are like third or fourth grade that are starting out, because they don't even think it's hard. But a lot of times when adults first try doing it, they get this idea that it's hard because it's something they haven't done before. But the way that you can get it to come out and get the feel of it to where it's not that hard of a thing is for pedal F. You could just basically think of it as taking a low B flat and forcing the pitch down so that it becomes an F. So then an A would be, or an E would be like taking an A and doing that. And so on. And then what happens on C as this is what I was mentioning, is that for most people, when they do a pedal C, it's going to be under pitch. So instead of an octave below, like it's going to be under, and then in time it'll come up to pitch. But you want it to have that kind of really relaxed sort of feel to it, instead of trying to do it like some people might do with buzzing, where they purse their lips out like this. This would be the wrong way to do it. Because the reason why is you want the pedals to eventually feel like they're part of your playable range. So you could slur from like low C to like from pedal C all over the horn. So if I did this, like, so I'm not having to move my mouthpiece around like embouchure wise, or using the tongue level in the air. So what that does, it makes it to where everything's going to work more freely. So that's kind of the purpose of the pedals.
Okay, and a couple people are asking then, so in the beginning, if the open pedal C is out of tune, are you actually, or should they manipulate their chops to get it in tune, or over time does that just sort of happen?
Over time it'll just sort of happen. And that's and some people it'll stay low under pitch for longer. And like out of all the students I've ever taught, I'd say like probably less than 5% of them ever get the pedal C to just pop out right on tune with that big full sound. Most people are a little bit under pitch. But then most people, after several months, maybe as long as a year, it eventually is pretty close to being in tune. But the thing about it too is you don't want to like blast them out and like honk them out, because it'll get everything all spread out and kind of out of whack and make the rest of your playing kind of messed up. So the point is that you go down to them and it's kind of a little bit of a relaxation sort of thing, instead of trying to belt them out so loud.
Okay, and another question is being asked if you would kind of go over the part in the video where you talked about the lip flexibility part regarding the warm-up.
Yeah, with like I'm guessing what they're asking about is like tongue level and that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're asking for specific books, pages, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I listed off a bunch really fast.
Are you going to be posting that video anywhere?
Yeah, I actually have it up on YouTube right now. It's just private right now. I figured in case the internet failed or something, I'd have a way to just turn it on, you know. But I mean, some of the books, I'll tell you some places to look for it. Like Claude Gordon's Brass Playing is No Harder Than Deep Breathing book lists some of these books in there. Also, there's an article on my website that's called What to Practice. And I kind of list things by category on there. So that would be kind of useful. And in my own ebook, I have towards the end of it, I have a list of things where I break them down into categories. But I'll list some of them now. And I think flexibility books are good I think everyone should just get as many of these types of books as possible. Like Walter Smith, Lip Flexibilities, Earl Irons, 27 Groups of Exercises. Roy Popper mentioned that. That's a great book. I love that book. Charles Cullen, Advanced Lip Flexibilities. Charles Cullen's 100 Original Warm-Ups. Let me see what else. Del Stager's, which that book is out of print, but that's got some cool lip flexibilities in it. Then in the St. Jacome book, there's a section of it, like if you look at the beginning around page 15, page 19, page 24, page 49, I think it's page 64, and then maybe page 81. There's a set of flexibility studies that go on open valve, but you should do them through all 7 fingerings. And then in St. Jacome, in the middle of the book on page 157, it's got these little etude things that are like three lines long with a bunch of different models, and they're a form of tongue level exercises. Also in the Arbin book with like the interval studies and some of the lip trill, lip flexibility things, those are like that. There's a book that I never did this with Claude Gordon, but I've taken some of my students through it. It's by a Chinese man named Bai Lin. And I kind of look at that book as kind of like a hybrid between Walter Smith Lift Flexibilities and Charles Cullen Advanced Lift Flexibilities book. See, and we even there was a book that Claude did later in the lessons with him by a guy named Pedro Lozano. He was a Mexican trombone player. And we took those lift flexibility books and worked them out on the trumpet. So it's basically anything that you're able to do, like, like slurring patterns with open or second valve or whatever, so that you can feel how to move around the horn with the tongue level in the air.
Okay. So another question here, it's targeted at young students, but I think it could apply to any of us. Any suggestions, more questions about learning to tongue correctly and getting the articulations happening? Any specific tips, tricks, whatever ways to go about that?
Yeah. And I just remembered someone put down here, Daily Trumpet Routines by Claude Gordon. That's also another tongue level book. Okay. With starting, I start beginners. I usually have maybe 5 or so that I start a year that have never played the trumpet before. And what I try to do is keep things simple to where I don't get them overthinking anything that they're doing. And I first, if the very first lesson, I want people to just basically do like 2 or 3 things. I want them to be able to take a big breath, sustain a note, and be able to feel how to do the slurring from like a low C to a G, and be able to feel their tongue moving and be able to tongue or articulate a note. So I want them to be able to produce a clean T, going T, 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 so that the note responds clean. Because as we all know, as a trumpet player, if your attack stinks, it's in one note, people are going to tell that you're really not that great at playing. So I make that, like, whether they're playing scales or various exercises, I want to be able to hear that clean articulation. Now, in regards to K-tongue modified, I usually tell people about that pretty soon, what it is and where the tip of the tongue needs to be at the top edge of the bottom teeth, and their tonguing just slightly behind the teeth, instead of taking the tip of their tongue up onto their top teeth, like t-t-t-t-t. I personally used to play that way for like 6 years, so I totally know what that was like. And when I changed it, it made a big deal it made a big change in my playing. What I also do is I have people do K-tongued just by itself, and try to get them as comfortable with K-tonguing as they would with T. So like if I did, like, first I'll do something really simple with just all T. This is all T. I did the same thing I can do with K-tongued. So that's all K, and the K you can eventually play all over your horn just like you could with T. So like if I went, so that was all K. So what that does is it makes it so that when you're doing K-tongue, your tip of your tongue is not going up and down to your top teeth. You're using more in the middle part of your tongue. And what some people do when they're trying to improve their tonguing, they'll do the K like too far back in their tongue, like you want the K to actually be more up in the middle of the tongue. Like when I do my K tonguing, it actually feels like it's about here, right? K feels like it's like pretty close to the front. So when I'm doing double tonguing, going like it's that's all really happening like pretty close in that front part of my tongue. So hope some of that. The other things that you could do that would improve it would be doing models. Like in the Daily Trumpet Routines book, it's got all the same sort of patterns where you do it single tongue, K tongue, double tongued. I also tell people to do backwards double tongue, going like ki ti instead of tiki tiki ti. And that sort of stuff's also in St. Jerome, page 157. So you're basically training your tongue to do the same thing a whole bunch of different ways.
Okay, some other recurring questions here. In the video, two things. In the video that you showed with Claude playing,
Yeah.
where was that? What was his age at the time? And also people want to know if your aperture changes from register to register.
Okay. So yeah, I meant to mention that in the video. So when that video was done, it was done somewhere in the Midwest. It was originally done by like the Selmer Corporation, and it used to be on a VHS tape, then they put it on a DVD, and then it went out of print, and it's in my ebook. So I did an excerpt out of that. Now, literally a few months before he did that, he'd had quadruple bypass surgery. So when you see his hand shaking, it's because literally he was still I think I saw it one time. I remember my father had a aneurysm surgery, and seeing where they basically like saw you open and open you up. So when that happened to him, he had this weird thing that would happen where it wasn't normally, it wouldn't do it, but if he lifted his hands up, like up about this high, and especially was like holding the trumpet, he couldn't hold his hands like really steady like he used to be. I mean, he was a pretty strong-willed person, so he didn't care if that happened. He'd just pick his trumpet up and he was going to play. And I remember one of the times when he demonstrated something like that at the first brass conference I went to in '84. His heart surgeon was one of his students, and he was like, "Don't do that. We're in the middle of the mountains, and if you like have something burst or something, we can't get you to the hospital." But I mean, so you got to realize that was literally a couple months after he'd had that surgery. I think the other question was
And so did he?
Yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
I'll get to the other question, but this goes right into it. So, because another question was, did he play a lot in your lessons? Did he demonstrate a lot, or was he more describing?
No, this is something that is probably unique. I don't know hardly any other people that do this. He never played one note in a lesson. I never heard him play one note in a lesson. I heard him demonstrate at a couple other things, and I heard recordings of him. And like at his brass conferences, he would demonstrate a few things. He was really good at communicating what he wanted, maybe a little bit similar to what Roy Popper was talking about, where he didn't use as many words as maybe I do. And he would sit there and he'd just listen to you, and he'd tell you, do this. And it would get you focused on the one thing that mattered the most, and it would make your playing start to change. And similar with the practice routines, where he knew just how much to give you, what to tell you to think about when you're doing it, and he'd give you your assignment, which is like really specific. And he was very encouraging. I remember sometimes I'd come into a lesson and be, down about whatever. And what was cool is like every single lesson I'd leave and I was pumped up to go home and like practice, because I was like, man, I want to go do that. Can't wait till I get home. So, but he never played a note in the lesson. That's quite unusual,
Okay, and the other question was, when you change registers, are you changing your aperture?
I don't really feel I mean, here's the thing about me that's kind of, when people talk about the aperture, like Claude never thought that was something to think about, and said that that's not really what controls it, because it's the tongue level controlling the velocity. Now, I personally play off to the side of my mouth, and if I don't have one of these mouthpiece visualizer things where you can see, but I have like put that up to my lips. I don't really have like a aperture and opening my lips, because where I put the mouthpiece on my lips is off to the side. So when I kind of put it up, there's really not an opening in there that looks like an aperture. But what I definitely feel is the movement of the tongue and the shape of the tongue inside my mouth that changes. For me personally, like when this accident happened with my tooth, I basically got about 2/3 of my tooth, this tooth busted off. And when the dentist went and replaced it, they said they were going to make it the same. But when they put we tried temporary bonding and stuff, and it kept breaking off because I kept telling them to get it thinner. And then once we finally replaced it with a permanent cap or crown, the thing was like twice as thick as my normal tooth was, and then my playing was really messed up. And I also, when I mentioned like the embouchure thing being 2/3 on the top lip, when I started with Claude, I literally played about like here. So when that tooth was made thicker and longer, it made it to where I had like hardly anything that could vibrate. So when I went to study with Claude, we talked about doing about the embouchure change thing or having it higher at the brass camp, but he actually didn't tell me to do it. But I looked down the list of 7 items, and the way I thought about it was, man, we're driving all this way from Bakersfield, and I'm doing this stuff. We're paying a lot of money. I'm not going to let it be my fault that this doesn't work. So I'm moving my embouchure up higher. So literally came back from the lesson, said it's going up on my top lip, and instantly I like lost all my range, where I could basically only play an F or G on top of the staff. And it created some frustration, starting getting better. But so, and then recently, just about a little over a year ago, I was actually very worried about changing this tooth. And one of my students, his dad is a cosmetic dentist, and he was also a trumpet player in college. So we went through a process of molds and different, and this tooth has been completely changed and is like, I'm totally happy with it. And it didn't do a single thing to my playing. It actually feels more comfortable, but it didn't change my playing, good or bad. It just looks better and like feels better.
Okay, another person here is saying when you were talking about the 3 different stamps that Claude would put on the pages, he remembered the big breath, chest up, and strike the valves hard and lift them high, but he can't remember what number 3 was.
Okay, watch the tongue. So that basically meant visualize what your tongue is doing inside your mouth. One of the things that was weird, like in maybe the first or second lesson, I saw Claude stamp that in my lip flexibility book, and I was like, what's that mean? He was like, watch the tongue. Pay attention to that. It's going to teach you more than I can explain. And I was like, okay. Now, what happened over years of study is, like, I can recall, like, for example, with my single tonguing, we switched and I started doing K-tongue modified from the other way. I wasn't as fast when I first started doing it. I felt like my progress with single tonguing wasn't as fast as some people, but it eventually got there. And as it progressed, I remember it feeling like it used to be further back on my tongue, and it got closer to the tip. Like when I single tongue, it feels like it's like maybe like 1/8 of an inch from the very tip, like maybe there. But it used to be back further. And the idea of watching the tongue, it's like through playing the exercises, it revealed things about how it worked. So that was kind of, I think to some extent, everyone thinks this, that when you're practicing, you should be like learning from yourself when you're learning as you're practicing. So it's not just checking out and just playing the exercises without thinking. You want to think and feel certain things when you're playing, and listen to yourself, of course.
So if Claude were still alive today and he were a part of this session, what do you think the most important thing he'd want to tell the trumpet players that have joined us today?
His big thing that he'd always say was, it's how you practice that counts. One of the things that I always, like in the Daily Trumpet Routines book, it's kind of a really simple thing that's in there. He makes a point. He says thousands of people play the instrument, and there's only a few virtuosos that you can count on your hand. And his point is that there's got to be something that they are doing that's different than most people. And it's not just practicing hours and hours. I mean, it's good to put time in on the trumpet, but it's all in how you do it, so that it's not just thinking that it's automatically going to happen because you're spending more hours in the practice room.
Okay, and you've mentioned a few different lesson episodes, but is there any one thing that happened that really stands out as like I'll never forget this, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I listened to the other two sessions, and I was kind of thinking of one that what was kind of funny because he was there was one, he was very like, he expected you to practice, and I always practiced, like, and never like slacked off. I think in 10 years of practicing I might have missed 4 or 5 days, and a couple of those days was because I got chicken pox when I was like maybe 16 or 17, and I was really, really sick. And I still tried to practice with like 104 fever or higher, and I just couldn't at a certain point. But so I never slacked off. But this one time, Claude had already gotten sick, had heart surgery, a bunch of stuff happened to me, moved back to Big Bear. And I would have to drive maybe 2.5, 3 hours to get to the lesson. And what I would do is I'd typically grab a hamburger and a meal and eat it in the car. I'd get it at the bottom of the mountain. I drove up the mountain in about an hour, got to my lesson, and he didn't always ask me to do the systematic approach or the range study book. So that wasn't, after a while, it's like we knew how to do it, and he would hear a little bit of it, but never really hear me go through the whole thing. With this one time, he was like, okay, let's hear you do the systematic approach book. So we started doing some of the stuff, and I think I was up around like a double high A or something like that. And Big Bear is like pretty high altitude. Like, I don't know if it's like 6,000 or 8,000 feet. It's kind of high. And I'd just eaten all this food, and I'm up there, and I'm like ready to like pass out. And I'm like, oh, I feel really bad. And the first thing he said to me is like, did you practice? And I was like, yes, I really practiced. So